Hello everyone, my name is Ethan Kelly. I am the founder and creator of Let's Talk Elections, and welcome back to another episode. Today I'm joined by someone who really needs no introduction, Congressman Maxwell Frost from Florida's 10th Congressional District. Congressman, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, good to be here, man. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. So I want to jump right into it. I have a lot that I want to talk to you about. The thing that I think is just super interesting about you at its foundation, I remember after the 22 midterms, you were elected as the youngest member of Congress ever, as well as the fact as the first Gen Z member of Congress. So thinking back to where you were about 3 years ago campaigning, is Congress everything you expected? Are things different? Are they better? Are they worse? What do you think?
All of the above. It's a lot more than I expected, right? Like there's like no way to fully prepare yourself for the job. And honestly, there's no way to fully prepare yourself for the campaign. I mean, you know, I come from working on campaigns. I was a field director for many cycles for both candidates and then ballot initiatives and then ending at March for Our Lives. And I thought when I was launching my campaign, oh, I've done this before. I've done a bunch of campaigns. Like I know what it's like. And of course, being staff on a campaign, you pour your all into it, right? Of
course.
But it's just a different level of, I mean, it's like you're literally your life when you're the candidate, and every single little thing becomes like an existential threat to the campaign, which is then an existential threat to like what you're doing in your life at that point. And the amount of emotional labor that you get during that time is really difficult. So like that year and a half of me running for Congress, hardest thing I've ever done in my life.
Imagine, yeah.
Then coming into Congress, you know, it's interesting. Last term was a lot different than this term. I wonder why.
I'm sure.
And you know, a lot of the more like norms and bipartisanship and all this kind of stuff that is more institutional is not really existent at a high level right now. And the job is just a lot different. But, you know, a lot of the partisanship we see, a lot of times we attribute it to the people in the institution, which is part of it. But a lot of it has to do with the place itself and the operation. That's really what caught me by surprise, is like the fact that it is written in the operation, the way Congress runs, that you're rewarded when you are crazy and you're not rewarded when you're not crazy, and like you work together and you get stuff done. And I think that's interesting. So there's like a lot of reforms we got to make in this place, from the way campaigns are run, the way campaigns are financed, to like even the way committees are run and where we sit and how we sit. I mean, just think about it. You walk into a committee room, it's like a stage. I mean, you have stage lights. We're supposed to really be working together, but you're facing the cameras. I mean, it's all like a show, and it's like that on purpose. And I think these little things stack up and contribute to a lot of the chaos that we see.
And so building on that, I think one thing that's been really interesting for me, at least being around Washington, D.C. and having been meeting with a lot of people that are in Congress and I see on TV that are actually very different in person. Have you had that experience with members that might seem a bit more extreme, more out there online, but are actually more normal when it comes down to things when the cameras are off?
Oh, all the time. Yeah. I mean, there's a ton of people that when the cameras are off, they're just a completely different person. And this is the difference, like, especially when I'm thinking about my Republican colleagues, like there's two different types of people. There are performers and true believers. And it's really important to distinguish who's who, because it'll help you figure out who can I work with on this legislation versus this legislation. And that's part of what helped. You know, about a third of my bills were bipartisan last Congress, and the two that I got through the House were bipartisan. Obviously, we're in a Republican Congress. And so, but kind of figuring out who's who and what they are is really important. There's a lot more more performers than true believers in the place, depending on where the national party is at the moment. So obviously you have Donald Trump. So you have a lot of people who are like getting in the pretzels and figuring out like, you know, how are they going to appease that side of the party, which is kind of taken over the whole thing. And it's interesting to see, but it's also really sad to see, obviously.
Yeah, and we talk about expectations, especially on the Republican side from President Trump. I think here more so on the Democratic side, what do you think has really changed? I mean, a year ago, Vice President Harris took to the top of the ticket. Things really did change, and it feels like it's been a really, really long time in these past 365 days. And so what do you see as a major change that you've seen in terms of Democratic strategy and Democratic politics, especially in responding to what your constituents want to see in pushback against a president that had just been elected?
I think taking a step back, like for the whole party, I think we're still having those, like we're all having those conversations, right? And that's like, you know, the, you know, disarray or chaos that people call it this and that, but it's really like really important conversations on figuring out like we lost, right? And so after you lose, there's two options, right? You either do like a analysis and figure out how are we going to change, not necessarily our values, but what we're doing, what we advocate for, how we advocate for it, how we do things. You know, a lot of people say the biggest problem is communications, which I really disagree with. I mean, I think that's a big part of it, but if it's just a comms problem, that means we're saying that we do everything right, not enough people know about it, not enough people hear about it. And I think that's part of it, but I would also argue that we don't do everything right. And so I think both are things we have to contend with and fix. And that's the whole party. Me, myself, you know, it took me about a few weeks to a month within the Trump administration to really figure out my role and be very comfortable with it in this moment. Yeah. And like, look, we knew what he was going to do. We had Project 2025. We were talking about it. But Project 2025 is Florida 2020. I mean, the stuff going on around the country right now, we're very used to in the state of Florida. Mm-hmm. It's been happening under DeSantis. And so we know how to respond to it. But I also needed to figure out, like, you know, I'd just come from 2 years where I really valued getting through bipartisan legislation. I really valued, like, working with an administration to bring back resources to my community. And now we're in the place where you can't really do that. I mean, here's an example. I have a bill called the Votes Act. We came up with it pretty late in the last term, but I really wanted to get it through. And what it does is expand voting rights to people who are in the United States military serving overseas, which it's not necessarily codified for everybody. Super bipartisan. I had more Republicans and Democrats on the bill. Wow. We got it through the committee really quickly. I was very relentless in pushing it through. It got scheduled for a vote on the House floor. I had a hotline ready in the Senate, which means it would just kind of move through unless there was an objection. And my goal was, like, Biden's going to sign this thing before he leaves office, right? And it'll be a really great bipartisan win. A few hours before the bill was scheduled to get passed, Trump posts on Truth Social about my bill, and he says, I introduced the bill to rig the election. And so then it got pulled. And now, just a few months later, 6 months later, I'm trying to introduce it, and I can't get a single damn Republican on the bill. And just 5 months ago, I had more Republicans and Democrats on it, endorsed by the American Legion, every military organization you can think of. So I'm very honest with my constituents about things. I mean, in the first term, I would say, look, judge me on the bills I pass, how much I can actually get done. Outside of bills too, working with the administration, judge me on that. But in my last state of the district, I was honest with everyone. I was like, look, I'm not sure that's what you should judge me on this term, because we're just in a different environment. And I think my job is a little different right now, in being an oppositional force to the kidnapping that we see going on, an oppositional force to policies that are making the economy worse for people, their economy worse, an oppositional force to the erosion of our democracy. And that's what I tell people, and people are really resonating with it at home.
Thinking about, you're in the opposition right now. Yep. Republicans have a trifecta. They have the Senate, House, and of course they have the White House. Thinking to 2026, I saw a new poll from Atlas Intel that showed Democrats leading by about 8 points in the generic ballot. CBS News released a poll today showing President Trump with the lowest approval rating that he's seen this second term. And so I think about Donald Trump's pivot now to Texas, thinking about redrawing the states and the boundaries. I mean, do you think this is a power grab? Do you think Republicans are trying to prevent what they see as a potentially insurmountable loss?
Oh yeah, I think in his head, Donald Trump has already lost the midterms, and it's part of the reason why they've been working so fast. I think he learned that from his first term, right? There was a lot that he wanted to do that maybe they dragged their feet on, that they left for the end. Democrats took the House. He wasn't able to do much. Right. And I think in their head they said, this second time we need to fire everything off because my presidency isn't 4 years, it's 2 years. Right. But I think he's also thinking, well, maybe we can salvage it by cheating. And so instead of voters choosing the politicians, let's have the politicians choose the voters. And that's what he's saying they need to do. And it's crazy because Trump is the most corrupt president ever. I mean, he makes Watergate look like nothing. And but I think part of the reason why a lot of people, I don't want to say give him a pass, but maybe it's not top of mind for folks, is because he does it in the open. So people assume because it's in the open, maybe it's okay, but it's the exact opposite. And it's crazy, that interview where he was at a press conference and people were like, asked him about, so are you asking Texas to dramatically change the district? And he was like, no, you just rewrite it and we gain 4 or 5 seats. What the hell is that? I mean, it's crazy for a politician to just say that, number one, outright, but just at all, right? But it's the world we live in now. And so I think he knows, because the big ugly law was passed, largest transfer of wealth from the working class to the billionaires and mega corporations in the history of the country. 17 million people getting kicked off to health insurance.
Yeah.
Like, people are going to start feeling this as the months go along, and his approval ratings are going to get lower, and they will lose the House, especially if we do our jobs, right, and making sure that we win these elections. And so I think he's figuring out maybe we can salvage it by cheating and doing these mid-decade redistricting. And so I'm of the thought, that we can't fight with our hands behind our back, tied behind our back. And I think I agree with a lot of the governors who are coming out and saying, look, Texas, if you do this, we're going to do it. And it's shitty, right? I mean, it's bad that things have devolved to this, but it's Donald Trump to blame, and we can't allow him to just rig the outcome of our elections by doing this mid-decade redistricting.
And you talked about this is the day and age that we live in where this is now possible. And so I was going to ask the follow-up, the same thing that the reporter asked President Trump about California and Gavin Newsom's intention to essentially fight fire with fire. I think Democrats are actually really liking this new energy that a lot of these Democratic governors are bringing. I think many of the other states too that are considering it, I think New York, Washington State, a bunch of them are talking about redrawing their maps. So you think this is an okay, reasonable way to go? Do you think Democrats should do it? Is this something that you think maybe should just be held as an empty threat and then not followed through upon? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, no empty threats. I mean, I don't believe in empty threats, or I don't believe in saying that you're going to do something and not following through as a general principle. So I think this is something we must do. And gerrymandering, look, I mean, all the states with the fair redistricting committees and all this, which is great, they're all in Democratic states.
Sure.
And we're in this situation where the Republicans are the ones gerrymandering the most outright, and this is part of the reason why the balance of power is so, it looks weird and feels weird, and it's because look at what's going on in what happened in the state of Florida. We lost 2 seats because of gerrymandering.
And violated the Voting Rights Act.
Violating the Voting Rights Act. And so, and they want to continue to do this. And so I think we have to fight fire with fire because, I mean, we have to win the midterms. Right? Everything Donald Trump is doing, he will continue to do unless we put a check on him. And he's destroying this country, and not just destroying the country from like a protecting our democracy point of view, but people's livelihoods.
Absolutely.
And this is part of the reason why, so much good happened under the Biden administration. And the economy was growing, right, in that last year on paper. But as you travel the country, you would ask people, and they'd say, I'm not feeling it. Well, it makes sense. Donald Trump spent 4 years rigging the economy for the wealthy and making wealth inequality worse for people. And when the economy is stacked like this, when it grows, guess what? It grows like that too. That means the people at the bottom, no matter what good policies are moving through to grow the economy, we're not going to feel the majority of that benefit because the billionaires have it stacked against us. And Donald Trump was to make it even worse in this country. And so we have to view this, it's really an existential threat to our country and working people, and we have to fight fire with fire. The only way this country can have really fair laws against gerrymandering is if everybody does it. And that's what we have to do in Congress. We have to pass a law to mandate independent redistricting committees for every state. We can't have some states doing it and some states not doing it. This is the problem with a lot of the gun laws, right? Gun laws work. They help end gun violence. Illinois has great gun laws. And most of the gun violence that happens in Chicago comes from surrounding states that have horrible gun laws, right? The decisions other states make impacts us. We're the United States. We're not like the independent states, right? Mm-hmm. And so on gerrymandering, we have to have a federal solution here.
And so thinking about all these talking points that I think Democrats also have just been really trying to build up around this bill that Donald Trump just passed. What has been interesting is that not much really fractures the MAGA base in terms of their support of the president. Looking at that CBS News poll, it was very much independents and Democrats, of course, driving that number down for Donald Trump. Independents, who I think came into this second Donald Trump as being in office with an open mind that he might be doing something different. After all, he did win by a bigger time the second time around. But now we're starting to see that dissipate. But the MAGA base really only seems to be fractured. I think we can talk a little bit here about the Epstein Files and why I think it is interesting to see that that is something that is now resonating amongst the base. I think that Republicans have found that this is the one issue, that voters that might have been so loyal to no end are now finding that end at Epstein. And Trump is calling them pretty much disloyal and pushing them away. Why do you think this is what's so resonant amongst the base that has stood by the president for the past 10 years?
I think it's because it's a little bit more cut and dry, and it's harder to lie to people about it. it's interesting when I sometimes go back and forth with people on X, right, about the big ugly law. A lot of what the replies I get from the MAGA base actually doesn't have to do with tearing apart the foundation of my argument that it gives the most wealth from the poor to the wealthy, right? They're not saying, oh, well, no, that's actually a good thing because when they have more money, we're going to all do better. They're not saying that. They're saying my assertion is false, right? They're saying that, no, it doesn't do that. It actually gives us more resources. And that's a telling thing. Because what Donald Trump believes, right, he believes in trickle-down economics. He believes that when those at the top have more resources, everyone will benefit. But many in his base don't believe that. They just think we're lying about it because he says we're lying about it. When it comes to the Epstein situation, it's harder for him to lie about it because it's so cut and dry, right? It's like, release the files. Release them or don't release them, right? Tell people they're delusional or tell people something's coming, right? And it's a simpler situation in terms of it's harder to lie about because it's right there and people have been invested in it for a while, right? And people know a lot about the situation. And I think that's why it's just harder for Trump to navigate it. He's a liar, he's a con man. Everything he does, he lies about, but he's coming up to something here that it's just difficult to lie about it.
So do you think this is something Democrats could use in the 26 midterms? Do you think this is something people remember, that Trump didn't release the Epstein files? And what do you think Democrats should do as they navigate through the midterms?
It's hard for me to say how big of an issue it'll be. Okay. I will say that it's not going anywhere. I think it's going to continue to bubble up. I think it's going to be, and it is a big issue, but I don't know how much it'll translate into votes. But I will say oftentimes things that fracture a base like this, oftentimes it doesn't end up where most of the people say, you know what, our guy is not our guy. Let me go vote for the Democrat. But a lot of times it pushes them to not vote at all. And it pushes people into apathy because, something Donald Trump did a good job of, right, is getting out first-time voters who felt like a system didn't work for them. He drove a fear machine that pushed people to believe that, immigrants, trans people, whatever, were the reason they couldn't afford this life and afford America. They've been lied to. They thought he would do something about the Epstein files. He's not doing anything. He's calling them delusional and stupid and this and that. I think for a lot of these people, they're just going to say, you know what, screw politics. Like, I don't want to go out and vote. Now, I think it's important for Democrats. I'm about trying to get everybody, right? Like, this is about addition, not subtraction. But I think, a lot of people are going to look at this situation and are looking at this situation and will say, I invested so much in this guy and he lied to us. He called me delusional. Screw politics. And quite frankly, we see some of the same stuff on the left historically and on the right. This is why 50% of the country doesn't vote. Politicians promise something and then they don't do it. And Donald Trump is taking it a step further where he's not only not doing it, but he's calling you delusional for asking him about it, which is interesting because I believe that Donald Trump will be a politician that's seen in history of evil and all this, but as someone who brought a lot of new people into the political process, but then shoved those same people out because of his lies and the way he's really pushed them away.
I like that term to use, that politics is additive. In order to win elections, you have to build out a base and not scrutinize those who don't necessarily agree with you on every issue.
Yep.
I want to think about how you run your campaign. Running in 2022, multi-way primary, and then now through the past 3 years, your campaign has year-round organizing, right? And you guys seem to focus very heavily on trying to be present in the community and mobilize the base constantly and always in your district. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I actually ran on this as well. And a lot of it comes from me being a community organizer, and I was always upset with the way that politicians would get in the office, they continue to raise money, and then you pretty much just keep the money until maybe you get a challenge and you buy a gala table every once in a while for some fundraiser. And I just feel like we're in this moment, especially in the state of Florida, where for us to come back, we can't just say, Florida Democratic Party, do everything, right? They're an entity. They need to do their job, and they're doing good work right now. But it's also up to us as members of Congress, as members of City Council, legislature, etc., to contribute to this as well. And I'm someone where I believe I need to raise money and then I need to spend money. I don't believe on sitting on piles of cash in case one day I run for higher office or get a challenge. Like, come what may, but right now there's a challenge ahead of us. It's not necessarily like a challenge to me specifically in my seat, but there's a challenge to the state, there's a challenge to my region and our people. And I feel like I must spend my resources and time to make sure that we're amassing political power, because it's not the Maxwell Frost show, right? It's building a ecosystem of people in power that share values with me, and we can work together to, hopefully bring the state of Florida back in a better place. And to do that, we have to be organizing all the time. And part of the issue, it's interesting because, a lot of times you go and knock on someone's door and a lot of people are annoyed by it, right? But what we found is we're doing it year round, and actually by doing it more, people are actually being more inviting to our volunteers.
Wow,
because instead of us popping up 3 months before election day, knocking on your door and saying, yo, haven't seen you in 2 years, but vote for Maxwell Frost, we're constantly speaking with people about things going on in the community. And sometimes it's not vote for Maxwell Frost. Sometimes it's hurricane season's coming up, like here are some resources. Sometimes it's, hey, Maxwell's going to be at a coffee shop if you want to go chat with him about stuff. Sometimes it's, there's a city council race coming up. Maxwell endorsed this candidate. We believe in this candidate. Can you help us get them across the finish line? And it helps us, it's a difference between transactional organizing and transformational organizing. And I just think elected leaders, we just have to step up a lot more. And so that's why I'm proud of our year-round organizing program. We have 3 cohorts a year. The middle one in the summer is we do Democracy Summer, which Jamie Raskin founded.
That's right, yeah.
We have 30 fellows on right now that are high school and college aged. And then we have 2 other fellowships in the kind of springtime and wintertime, where these are paid, part-time jobs essentially, so that way it's accessible to people. They learn how to run a campaign and be involved in a campaign, and then they go out and knock doors, plan phone banks, help us with events. When I do my music festival, they help us run the music festival. The reason we do the music festival is to bring new people into the system who maybe they're not going to come to the Maxwell Frost Canvas launch, but they'll come to, Mad Soul and see, Muna or whoever, and then we
get
the
band kid in you, right?
Yeah, it's the band kid in me. But I'm always just trying to figure out ways we can bridge that gap between cool and consciousness, right? Politics, just so many people, when they're confronted with something horrible going on, right? Whether it's gun violence, whether it's whatever atrocity is going on, they'll either pick apathy or action. And we're trying to always, be the type of organizers that help give people a political home. And I hope it'll be with my campaign. Sometimes it isn't, right? That's why at my festival, we invite a lot of community organizations to be a part of it, because maybe someone doesn't want to organize with my campaign, but they want to organize with March for Our Lives or the Dream Defenders or whatever the organization is. And I just want to make sure people are plugged in and organizing, because we're all working towards the same goal.
So cool and consciousness. That's the motto there. A lot of my viewers have been recently talking about last month's primary in New York City. With Zohran Mamdani. I just got back from New York City last night, actually. It's really interesting to see. Do you think Mamdani provides a pathway or a vision forward that Democrats might want to adapt, might want to do? It was very clear he mobilized a lot of voters that just hadn't voted in a very long time. A lot of young voters, a lot of people who would tell me that they were never voting and were all of a sudden turning out in a primary, in a mayoral race, in an off year. And so it was really interesting to see. What do you think?
I think it's amazing. And I think, he was here last week and spoke with a lot of the House Democrats, and he said something that is, I think, the key to success. And he said, look, early on in the race, we said we want to do a campaign that isn't just a big deal in New York City political world, but in the New York City world, right? In New York City, not just in politics, but in the culture of the city. And that's what marks that difference. And every major social movement that actually ended up with changing something has always bridged that gap, and has always, it's always been a blurred line between the political culture and just the culture. And I think a lot about March for Our Lives, right? When I was at the Orlando one, I'm walking around and I ran into a few friends from elementary school that I kind of kept up with that I knew hated politics. And I was like, why are you here? And the answers were interesting. It was well, Beyonce told me to be here. My friends told me to be here. But my favorite answer was the last person who said, I don't know, I just felt like I needed to be here. And I bet you if we went through and we spoke with a lot of the voters, young voters who came out to vote for Zohran, who had never voted before, maybe they've been pissed off about politics, why did you go vote? You'd hear a lot of the same answers. I just felt like I needed to come and make my voice heard. And what that is indicative of is his campaign became part of a culture. And it wasn't just a political culture, but like a culture of joy, of fighting for the things we believe in, of seeing someone who's running for political office and saying, like, feeling that hope. And he did it in many ways. Obviously, the content he produced, but it's not just a lot of people do good videos, right? But it's also the values and the policies that he was talking about, right? That people watched and said, hell yeah.
Yeah, they work together, right?
Yeah, they work together. It's not one of them. One without the other, he probably wouldn't have won.
Yeah.
Right? It's like all of this together that he created, and him himself and his volunteers and everything like that. There's never everyone always tries to find like the silver bullet in a campaign. It's never that. Something I used to tell my staff a lot is, winning campaigns is about creating environments, right? You're trying to create an environment in your district or city or wherever where when people go to vote, most people click you, right? And you create that environment in many ways: door knocking, online ads, content, mail, like all these things, door knocking, they all come together and just change the vibe of the city at that one point. And that's our job, is to create that environment. He created an environment of hope, and one centered around policies that are simple to understand but hit at deep-rooted issues of affordability and fairness in New York City, and people went out and voted for him. And young people came out, and I've been working in youth-centered politics for a while, and what he did in terms of getting the youth vote out is it's unheard of. Yeah. But he also, got out older voters, right, and won a lot of communities that a lot of people doubted he could win. Yeah. And it's because
they said it'd only be young white voters.
Yeah, it's going to be young, rich, white voters, this and that. And that's not the truth, right? He had a very diverse coalition because everyone's dealing with these issues of affordability. Yeah. And I always say, we always talk about the economy. I don't think, the average voter cares about the economy. I think they care about their economy, their life. And it's just difficult to think about big picture stuff when, you can't afford to live your life. And he hit that relentlessly with, 3 or 4 points that people understood. And obviously his platform is bigger than 3 or 4 points, but that repetition, I think, is really helpful. So very inspiring campaign, and all built on joy, you know?
Interesting. Yeah. I think Mamdani answered a lot of people's why they wanted to vote. But turning a little bit to you, do you have a story or a moment you could share with us that really drives your why? What keeps you motivated in Congress, especially in this day and age of partisanship and polarization? Do you have a moment like that you could share?
It's a collection of a lot of moments, and a lot of it is when I get back home. When I'm home in my district and I just see my community's been through a lot. I think back to, I just always bring this up to describe where I live, right? Pulse nightclub happened, right? 49 angels were murdered because they were gay, because they were queer, and because they were Latino. 49 other people were injured. Our community came together in such a courageous and loving way that fast forward now, the state of Florida is on every top 10 list of the worst places for a queer person to live in the entire country, right? The state of Florida is on every single list. Yeah. But then the city of Orlando is on almost every top 10 list of the best cities to live in as a queer person. So just think about that. This city in this hostile place is considered a safe haven despite what's going on around us. And I just think that just shows how resilient, how loving where I live is. And that's what gives me hope. When I come home and I go to a local concert, and it's not just a local concert, they're raising funds for something. They're talking about other things. When I, go to a restaurant, it's all about sustainability and fighting the climate. Everything is so connected in Central Florida in such a beautiful way. And and that's where I was born and raised in. It's my home. That's what gives me all the hope in the world, and that's what gives me the fight I need to come up here, because I'm not doing this alone at all. I mean, I get a lot of comments where people are only hope in Florida or Central. No, it's no, dude, there's so many hopes. Yeah. And I see them every weekend when I come home, and I see them every week when I go home, and that's what gives me so much hope.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
To end here, I wanted to ask, about 90% of my viewers are actually people aged 18 to 29, which is really exciting.
Sick.
But it also shows that there's a lot of interest amongst young people in this day and age of politics. What advice would you give to someone? Maybe someone who might want to run for office, might not, might want to get involved. What do you tell them if they're interested at all?
I'm going to give one kind of broad one, then I'll give a very specific practical one. Okay, so the broad one is know why you want to run and be able to answer that question. Look, I didn't run to be the first Gen Z member of Congress. And quite frankly, during the campaign, I never talked about that. In fact, I didn't really realize that would be a thing until I was like speaking with someone who was trying to get to donate to me over the phone, and they mentioned it to me. And I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. And I
be pretty cool, right?
I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. I didn't run to like break a record. I ran to end gun violence because that's the issue I've been fighting for since I was 15 years old. And the thing I encourage people to do, I think, when we talk about what experience is right for Congress, it's like, what does that even mean? But I had been organizing in my community for years. And I want to encourage people, when you think about running, if your why has to do with breaking a record or with anything like that, I encourage you to take a step back. I'm not saying don't run. I'm saying take a step back and really try to understand, why does your community need you to represent them in Congress, in the city council, on the school board? What are the issues and what experiences do you bring to the table to help deal with them? And it doesn't have to be, I've been a lawyer for 15 years. Like, I'm not saying that, right? But like, being able to talk about that, I think, is so important, because that's what people want to hear about when you're running. And if you can't answer it to yourself, it might not be time. And to be honest, when I was first asked by some friends to run for Congress, I said no, because I couldn't answer that question. And for me, it took about 5-6 months of just festering. It was in the back of my head, and I was like, I don't even know why I would run for Congress. That's I told them hell no in January of 2021. And then in June of 2021, I came to a place where I was like, actually, I think I have to run. And these are the reasons why. And I think that's part of the reason we had a successful campaign, is we started off on that foundation. And you're going to have hard days, and where you're going to question why you're doing it. And when you can lock in on that reason, nothing will stop you from moving through the next day and the next day and the next day, to the point where hopefully you win. So that's something I would tell people, to just keep that in mind. Again, I'm not saying don't run. I'm just saying think about it. It might take you a week. It might take you a few months. It might take you a few years. I don't know. But just think about that. The second thing is save a lot of money, as much money as you can for your personal life. I mean, a lot of people know this about me. It's like, during my campaign, I experienced a lot of financial hardship. I thought I had enough money in the bank to run a year and a half without making income. I didn't have enough money in the bank to run without an income for a year and a half. I experienced homelessness because I got priced out of my apartment. My rent went up 33% in a month. I started Ubering to pay my bills. I was just getting a bunch of credit cards and maxing them out to pay for my food and stuff. And it just, like, if I had a family, I would have dropped out a few months in. I was able to slum it out for a while. And, now I've had a job for a little bit. And so I'm able to I'm working at paying
hopefully
back.
a good job.
Yeah, a good job. Okay. Paying back my debts and stuff. But the fact of the matter is, like, you shouldn't have to go into debt and ruin your financial future just because you want to raise your hand and say, what about me? And so there's a lot of institutional issues with running that I always encourage, especially young people, think about your personal plan. Like, how are you going to pay your rent? How are you going to do that? Not to discourage you from running, but so you have a plan. Yeah, to be real about it, so you don't have to worry about it as much. I had zero plan. I didn't even think about it until my rent went up, and I was like, what the hell am I going to do right now? So just think about that, and think about your network and your safety net. Because if it wasn't for my safety net, I would have had to drop out too. If it wasn't for my friends that would randomly like, yo, let me get you a meal. If it wasn't for like, my sister and like my girlfriend, like, who would give me rides. I didn't have a car at the time, or my parents who would, buy me meals, and you know what I mean? Like, it's just, think about those people in your life, like, and ask them, like, hey, can you help? I might need some help. And like, and just putting it all together early on will help you a lot.
Well, Congressman, thank you so much for being here.
Course,
I really appreciate it.
Being here, man.
I'm sure my viewers love hearing from someone in our generation who really understands a lot of these issues and can talk about them in a way that makes sense to them. And so I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I'm a fan of the channel.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.